Good afternoon. I'm Tim Rose, the editor of AM, and I'd like to welcome you to the AM100 webinar. Thank you for joining us. In normal times, obviously, we'd all be sat together at the AM100 Gala dinner, and I do hope that by November 2021, we can restore that tradition. But this year, we're having to be reliant on technology to bring you the AM100's highlights. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Steve Labar. He's partner and head of motor retail at the accountancy firm BDO. BDO will be familiar to many of you as our entry audit partner for the AM Awards. Well, I'm pleased that they've now joined us in partnership for the annual AM100 too. And in a few minutes, Steve will share some of the insights from our latest research into Dealer Group's 2019 performance. But while I'm at it, I must give my thanks to Piers Trenier Thomas, who'd previously worked with us on the AM100 for probably more than 2 decades, I believe. You'll soon be able to read in depth about this year's AM100 in the supplement, which is published along with the new issue of AM this Friday. But as a thank you for joining us today, at the end of the webinar, we'll release that report in a PDF form in the Handouts tab. So once we're done, you'll be able to dive straight in. So what will you hear today? I'm going to start by giving a brief overview of the market conditions to give some context to the AM100. Then Steve will outline the key insights into the AM100's turnover performance and examine the profitability of the 2020 AM100 before identifying a few other interesting highlights from our research. And after that, I'll welcome our guest panelists for a Q&A session, which will look at the learnings of the past 2 years and discuss their areas of focus for 2021 and beyond. Now, I've got quite a few questions prepared, but if you wish to put a question to the panel, please do use the question tab on the webinar dashboard, and we'll hopefully have time to include some of those. And then finally, we will close with a full 2020 AM100 countdown. So, onto the trading conditions the AM100 faced in 2019. The new car market has been in decline since its 2016 peak, and even after the WLTP turmoil of 2018, 2019 ended lower still at 2.3 million registrations. That was a 7-year low. Nevertheless, Britons bought more SUVs, more petrol or petrol electric cars, and more pure EVs than ever before. Well, not ever before in the case of petrol, but certainly in terms of the electrics and hybrids. And diesel market share had reduced to essentially 1 in 4 sales. So hybrids and plug-ins accounted for 7% of the market, half of where they are this year, as an illustration of how quickly things are moving on. The new van market was impacted by WLTP's introduction in 2019, but still had their 3rd highest result on record, with 365,000 registrations. And by 2019, dealers were 3 years on from the new car market peak, so many saw opportunities with used car sales. Total used car sales almost held flat at around the 8 million mark. Looking at the industry KPIs for 2019, shows dealerships on average achieved the benchmark of 1.5. Oh, lost the slides there. There we go. Of 1.5 used car sales to every 1 new for the first time in several years. But on average, return on sales continued to decline to around 0.8%. And of course, while the industry was giving it their best, the will we, won't we Brexit discussions continued to fill our newspapers, which left some consumers less confident about their spending on big ticket items. Well, now, that's enough from me for just now. I'll hand over to Steve Labar for his insights into the 2020 AM100.
Thank you, Tim. we're delighted to be associated with the AM100 this year, and I'll now take you through some of the results and findings, as Tim mentioned, in relation to the data that's been provided. Overall, looking firstly at turnover, turnover for the AM100 group has grown by £2 billion compared to the previous year, up to just under £70 billion for the year. That equates to about a 3% increase year on year, which closely mirrors the new car market, which itself, if people can remember back to 2019, increased by 2.4%. Sytner remains the largest group in terms of revenue size, and just over £1 billion ahead of Lookers and Pendragon. And actually this year, or in 2019, there's not been any significant change in terms of the makeup of the top 10 largest motor groups in the UK. And the largest increases have actually been through acquisitions. And mentions here go to Hendy's, who had the largest percentage increase, a 50% increase year on year, as a result of the acquisition of Westover Group back in March 19, and also Endeavour Motor Group that increased by 42%, again as a result of their 3 Volvo acquisitions, again in the early part of 2019. Other groups with significant growth were Riverside Motors, which were over 25%, and also HR Owen, again over 25%. And perhaps that just demonstrates the strength of the premium market, and it continues to grow and be strong. Overall, 19 groups in total grew by greater than 10% in terms of revenue terms year on year. However, it is interesting to note that of the 100, the AM100, 36 groups did not grow year on year. So perhaps that just demonstrates the continuing challenging market that was in place in 2019. The top 10 groups, as I alluded to, are hugely significant to the AM100, and they actually account for 49% of the total revenue for the AM100. So that equates to about £35 billion worth of revenue. But having said that, it is interesting to note that in terms of how the overall group has increased by 3%, the groups from number 1 to 50 in the AM100 have only increased by less than 2.5%, whereas the groups from 51 to 75 grew by 5.2%, and 76 to 100 increased by 3.6%. So it certainly wasn't a year where the big got bigger. Moving then on to profitability. As the old saying goes, turnover is vanity, profit is sanity. And again, we're pleased that even though it was a challenging year, 85% of the cohort still remains profitable. The most profitable group in the UK, and the only one that achieved greater than 3% return on sales, was PSA Retail Group, who over the last 5 years have consistently been in the top 5 profitable groups in the UK. There were 9 other groups compared to 10 in the previous year that achieved a return on sales of greater than 2%. And again, special mentions here go to Hatfields, Arnold Clark and Alan Ford, who all achieved greater than 2.5% return on sales. Looking at the largest increases within that top 20, again, mentions go to Allen's Ford, City West Country, Toomey's, Helston Garage and Cambria, who all had achieved increases of over 0.4% on year, again in what was a challenging market. But what was interesting to note was when we looked at the top 20 most profitable groups by profit in terms of pounds, in real terms, that top 20 group reduced by 29% year on year, from 551 million to 389 million. However, when you look further into the data, I think that's largely attributed to the reduction in profitability in Pendragon and Lookers, which obviously has been well documented over the past 12 months, and to a lesser extent, reduction in profitability in Sytner, although that group obviously remains highly profitable in its own right. Again, it's also interesting to note that of the top 20 groups by return on sales, only one, being Arnold Clark, was in the top 20 by revenue. So although those groups remain highly profitable, perhaps it shows that big is not always best. And it does show that the engine of the AM100 group is still a very strong group and resilient group. In terms of other highlights, Just some other data that we've able to bring out. The AM100 again still is a significant employer, and in terms of sites around the UK, there are over 3,000 sites represented by the AM100 cohort. And there's not been any real significant change in the year. You can see on the screen there's a reduction of about 99 locations in 2019. Perhaps that will change in 2020 and 2021 as people come out of coronavirus and the pandemic. The entry point for the year for the AM100 increased slightly to £130 million in terms of revenue, and there's not been any significant changes to the group. There was only one significant new entrant, which was Central Garage Uppingham, and other groups such as Chorley Group, WR Davies and Furlough Nunn remain just outside the top 100, but again remain profitable in their own right. Scale, as everyone can imagine, definitely does help, but it's not a barrier. There's a couple of BMW groups that only have 1 or 2 sites, being Park Lane and Partridge BMW, and they are absolutely right in the top 100 group. In terms of the used to new ratio, again, it was on a slide that Tim showed earlier. That again has increased, and the average for the AM100 was 1.5 to 1. And again, special mention goes to Arnold Clark and Drive Retail, who all achieved greater than 3 to 1 ratio. And again, I think as a result of 2020 and COVID, we would expect the average of 1.5 to 1 to only increase when we look at the 2020 and 2021 numbers. Finally, and lastly, and probably just as important, is around the people piece. Again, the AM100 is a real significant employer, and there's over 100,000 people who are, or staff who are directly employed by the AM100. So the whole AM100 group is a real key employer in the UK and a very important part of the wider UK economy. I will now hand back to Tim. Take it through.
Thank you, Steve. So just to summarise the points, some of the points that you've heard. So we've found that the 2020 AM100 cohort has grown by revenue, despite a modest reduction in the franchised outlets held and the difficulties in the market conditions. You've heard about a period of overcoming challenges and striving to preserve profitability as much as possible, with quite some focus on used cars for the businesses that have been most successful at that. There have been a few large-scale acquisitions, but the more acquisitive groups have tended to expand with bolt-on businesses, fairly small-scale additions, or even new and multi-franchise sites. The resilient groups particularly have robust practices, and a good proportion of premium brands do well at used car sales, and they're the ones that do tend to lead the sector. So just before we begin the Q&A, I'll remind you that the AM100 report will be available in the handouts tab before you leave later. And also, there's a couple of dates for your diary. January the 7th will be AM's Motor Retail Review webinar, the quarterly webinar, which will, at that point, look at the year-end new car market, amongst other things, opportunities for 2021, etc. And on January 20th and 21st, we have our AM Live virtual event. Obviously, with COVID, we've been unable to put on the event at the NEC this year, but we've got a pretty smart platform that we're using, and I hope that you'll register for that, please. So have a look on AM Online, or just Google for either event to register. So on to our guest Q&A. So I'm really pleased to now be joined by our guest panelists. We have Matthew Cheen from our webinar sponsor, Rapid RTC.
Darren
Edwards, the CEO of top-ranked AM100 Group, Sytner. Hopefully he's joining us. Stuart Foulds, the Chief Executive of TrustFord, and Peter Smyth, the Director of Swansway Group.
Hey.
Perhaps if I just put us onto cameras now, and that will help. Okay, thank you all for joining.
Good to be here.
I think hopefully Stuart's still logging in, but perhaps if we begin anyway. Darren, as top of the AM100, you're going to be the first one to get the first question, if that's okay. So as we've kind of outlined, the last couple of years have brought some quite significant hurdles, including WLTP, RDE, online competition, and obviously COVID this year. What have you learned, and what has Sytner learned about the business over this time?
I think you pointed out earlier on about used cars, and for us, growing used cars, both organically and by acquisition, has been a major focus. So, 1.51 is the average. We're now just over 2 to 1, and looking to grow that further. You can hear some of the great jobs done by people like Arnold Clark with 3 to 1. And you can see how profitable they are. We realised that aiming to sell more used cars is certainly something we've learned that we need to do to not rely on new car profitability. I think the other thing that is clear is that back in the 90s, when our dealerships were much smaller, we had absorption close to 100%, and then as the volume has grown, we've had to build and invest in significant premises, and those obviously come with a lot of cost. And the concept of 100% absorption for many has just disappeared over that time. So we've been over the last couple of years really focused on trying to get back to that. And to give you an example, in Q3, we were 90% absorbed. And if for many dealerships now and 3 of our divisions, we're over 100% absorbed. So focusing on after sales is being a huge, a kind of operational focus for us. So I think that they're the things that sort of really came out of, the last couple of years with WLTP. As a business now, new car profit only accounts for 25% of our growth. So if I go back to 2015, it was 60% was after sales and 40% in sales. So it's a new car. It's come down a lot. And then when I think about COVID, I think it's been well documented now. Introducing technology to become more efficient, and things like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, this kind of scenario where I've had 50, 60, 100 people on a screen before in the dark days, trying to work out how we're going to plot our way through, things like centralising telephone answering, warranty submission, video calls with customers. The click and collect scenario, all these things I think we've had to introduce over the last 8-9 months, and I think it's made the business much stronger as a result as well. It's been a couple of years of massive change, and none more so than probably in the last 7 or 8 months.
Thank you, Darren. And Stuart, from your perspective, what has TrustFord learnt from the recent challenges that the industry has faced?
Well, a lot of what Darren said, I would echo. I mean, I think from our point of view with COVID, we've learned a lot of lessons in terms of being able to work from home, and with the second lockdown in England, we've sort of been pretty well able to sort of go back and do it again. And I think that as we go forward, we will leave more people working from home. We've invested a lot in IT and laptops and all in technology to make sure that the likes of our call centres are primarily now working from home. And if we can do that, then there's a benefit in terms of saving on office space, heat, light, power, etc., etc. So I think the way forward for us is that we will have a much bigger percentage of our people working from home. And in terms of the PPE, we're now, I think we've spent the best part of £700,000 so far on PPE, so it's a big cost. And I'm actually up in Scotland, so we've actually just suffered the tier 4 lockdown as of this coming Friday. But The other area for us that's been very strong has been after sales, and particularly parts through our Parts Plus business, which we kept open right through the lockdown, and it remains open today, delivering parts to IMTs, to the blue lights, health workers, and so on and so forth. So been a really interesting time, and certainly one that nobody would have expected. But we've fought through, we've got through, and business has been pretty good, to be honest.
Good. And Peter, from your perspective, as we've heard from the nationals, but from a kind of regional group, what's your perspective on that?
Well, I hate to sound controversial, and I do not profess to be the font of all knowledge. But what I would say is this: you can't manage your business from home. We've worked out that we can operate with roughly 10% less people, and we haven't missed them. We've got better control than our costs, and we've looked at our good people, and we've kept our best people, and we've made sure that we've paid them well. And the other thing I would say is we've been completely ruthless with our loss-making businesses.
Okay. And Stephen Matthew, obviously, as in terms of working closely with dealers, what's your perspective on the challenges that the dealers have faced, and how you've seen them kind of overcome those? That's Matthew first.
Well, for us, it's been incredibly exciting, because working very closely with our dealer partners, as you say, Tim, we're not car retailers. I would agree with everything that Peter, Darren and Stuart have said, but probably summarise it up as having to adapt and change more quickly than ever before in the history of this industry. And I don't believe that bricks and mortar will disappear, but how we communicate with our customers is changing and has changed. And we've seen a dramatic difference between lockdown 1 and lockdown 2. In the lockdown 1, there were businesses saying, I'm physically closing and I can't operate. And in lockdown 2, the adaptive, as you said, the resilient groups have said, actually, no, we can still operate. We've put all these plans in place. We've got the tools to communicate with customers. And now it's mimic everything online that used to happen on the forecourt, but click and collect for the final delivery. And it's offering that omni-channel communication piece that is actually paramount. And of course, all the best business practices about stock and saving money and controlling costs, but to talk to your customers, to have the ability to do so whilst the dealership is physically closed, is the paramount piece going forward.
Okay. And Steve, do you have anything to add to?
Yeah, I think it's just about the resilience of the sector and how adaptable the dealers have been. I don't think anyone could have guessed how strong the return to business would have been when it reopened back in June. That 3 or 4 month period was just phenomenal. And I think hopefully people will agree that November is just a bit of a blip in the road for what's been a fantastic return to business from June.
Let's hope so. And perhaps you first, Peter, given your statement about not being able to run your business from home, interested in hearing what measures you've taken or put in place to support your people through the challenges that we've had recently.
Yeah, well, one thing that we do have, we've had a huge improvement in our internal communications. And the first thing that we do, and it was something that we thought that we needed right at the beginning of the lockdown 1, was a Zoom meeting of all our senior people. Now, even though they are in work, and I would say with the exception of our chairman, who incidentally comes into the Zoom meeting every single day at 9:30, we have the senior managers there, and we discuss things like cash management, debt management, inquiry levels, things like that. So we've been a lot more flexible. And the other thing that we have done with our people, we've given them an intense training on digital, because it's absolutely vital going forward.
Okay. Darren, from your perspective, obviously with a group with 10,000 plus staff, talk to us about the way that you've managed to keep those communications with everyone and keep everybody motivated.
Yeah, well, I probably have a slightly different opinion to Peter on the working from home aspect. I mean, I've been at home since January. I broke my hip, and I was on crutches for 12 weeks. So I had a bit of a precursor to what it's like managing a business on Zoom. So we had like 9,500 people furloughed at some point, and trying to manage the business from home was something that we've taken in our stride. And it's not ideal. You'd much rather have people collaborating and having that kind of camaraderie, but we have managed to make it work for us. I think introducing new technology for telephone systems. So we're now, all our contact centre team are working from home. Telephone answering is done at home. Warranty submission is done at home. We've got business managers, sales reps, and admin, all able to work from home on rota. So we're now being more flexible. So I think as an employer in the future for people more family orientated, I think that's going to help us. But things like topping up the furlough payment, we did that whilst they were off. Loads of communication. I think we've done something like 27 weekly newsletters, video. We have a tool which I think everybody, not everybody, a lot of people use, which is Yammer, which is like a Microsoft tool. And so we use that a bit like an internal Instagram feed. So whilst people were locked down, they were sending in videos of what they're up to. And, if you remember, it was beautiful weather. And so it was like barbecues and things like that, and dancing on TikTok. So that was quite fun. So it kept everyone sort of connected. And then I think now we're coming out, the other side and then going back into it, which has been a bit of a shock. We've tried to not furlough anyone. So we're the only people we've got furloughed at the moment are people that are on the critical list. So trying to keep the business running through this period. And Matthew mentioned it earlier about click and collect and things like that. We haven't really missed a beat. Our run rate is the same as it was prior to lockdown, very, very similar. So I think having people still working, it gives them something to do. And we've actually seen Peter and I were talking about this earlier, we've actually seen our inquiry rate improve during this period as some other dealers perhaps have retreated. So I think the resilience and the dealers that have gone for it, have meant that they can repay their teams with being able to take away the worry of perhaps being furloughed. So I think, that resilience and just lots of communication has meant that people feel still very connected to the business. So hopefully, when we come out the other side fully, that'll be rewarded with, lowering of attrition and hopefully, still being that employer of choice.
Okay, thank you. Stuart, your perspective on supporting your people?
Well, again, similar to what Darren said, we sort of communicate every week with all of the guys out there. We have lots of Zoom meetings. We had our annual conference. Normally would have been in October, and so what we did was we did a virtual conference. So the presenters went in with a film crew, and we did it on an individual basis, and then sort of got the film crew to map the whole thing together, and did the virtual conference to the 3,000 employees that we've got, all in the dealerships, socially distanced, using the great big television screens that we have in our Ford businesses. So that's been really good. We've had a lot of good feedback from that, and lots of things like online competitions for people to try and keep them motivated, keep them active. Just lots of different communications like that. One of the issues that we have today, and it'd be interesting to hear what Darren and Peter have, but we've got probably about 20% of our employees off with COVID or self-isolating. So there's about 600 that we're actually down at this point in time, and that's given us quite a lot of problems in terms of satisfying lead times in workshops. So that's a big issue, a much bigger issue than I thought it was going to be.
Wow. So perhaps on that, Darren and Peter, can you share the perspective from your business? Have you had cases within the workforce, and how have you been able to manage that?
Yeah, I mean, we have had cases. We haven't had any. I have to say, we don't have anything quite on that attitude, Stuart. We've had, I think, at our height just before lockdown, we might have had 70 people out of 9,000 off, with either isolating or testing positive. We've had a couple of people one right at the beginning and one right now that have been, pretty ill on ventilators. But, touch wood, I think, I've got to say full credit to our team that have put in, we call it Project Phoenix, which is our kind of way of responding to the, being COVID secure. And I think they've done an exceptional job of where we have had cases, coming in, deep cleaning, making sure everyone's socially distancing, which has been really hard at the beginning, So I think that's the other benefit of having people working from home. You can separate more people and give them a bit more space. So, but I feel for you, Stuart, that must be pretty hard to manage.
Absolutely. Peter, anything to add from Swansway's perspective you've had?
Yeah, we've had a couple of instances where we've had more than a couple of instances where people have had COVID. But what we have done, we've been very, very strict. If anybody has any symptoms, they must go home straight away, get tested, not return to work until they've got the results of the test. And where we've had pockets of breakouts, and we have had those, in fairness to the people that we've got around us, they've all mucked in. We've brought in people from other branches to help them out, particularly on the after-sales side.
Okay. And Stephen, Matthew, anything to add on the kind of people support? Any best practice you've seen in the industry?
Just to echo what Peter and Darren and Stuart have said about communication being key. I guess there were probably a couple of pressures on our staff. Number one, we did furlough a few people, but number two, during lockdown one, we became incredibly busy because we were doing all the changes for our customers, changing templates and things like that. So it was actually really gratifying to see that the staff threw themselves into that to support our customers. And by keeping the communication, by keeping regular touch points with the staff, we had a lot of global town halls because, as you know, we operate in different markets. It's about making sure the individual didn't feel like an individual, that they weren't alone, and also by being able to support our customers, it gave them some job satisfaction during a very difficult time. And I think, I guess we all agree that if we hadn't been working, I think it would have been an incredibly much more difficult period of all our lives.
Yeah, and just to follow on from that, Tim, again, communication that had to have been a two-way thing. So it's top down, but also bottom up. So, it's listening to your staff at whatever level they might be. And, ultimately think about their well-being. It's all very well communicating with them. But again, there's a wider piece about headspace, well-being and so on, which, again, I think a lot of groups have done very well on over this period of time.
I've certainly had the impression from what we've been reporting on the last few years, well-being has become a much hotter topic for all businesses. I think in motor retail in particular, which has been very, very good to see this year particularly. So now looking at next year, 2021, I won't ask you to make any huge forecast because I know it's quite difficult to know where we're going to be in 2 months, let alone kind of 12. But what do you have as the areas of focus for 2021? Perhaps starting with you, Darren again.
Well, I guess a few things. I mean, assuming that we can get back to some kind of normality, and I think for us. We've started selling cars online now. We've got a full kind of transactional sector on our website where you can buy a car, apply for finance, get an instant decision, and then the only thing left to do is arrange the handover. So we want to start seeing how we can develop that and push that so that we sold about 1,500 cars that way since we launched that in May, which is a tiny percentage of what we would normally sell, but it's a start in the right direction. And obviously that comes with quite a lot of cost efficiencies over looking at that. I think the FCA implementation of the finance commission models is going to be interesting to see how working with the lenders that we work with 20 different brands, so we've got a lot of different lenders to work through, deciding on the best way to do that and then implementing it. It's going to be something of huge focus next year. And I think potentially the biggest opportunity for us is to make sure that some of the scenario that's happened this year with, the absence of self-registered cars in particular, and how that's helped us drive new car profitability and used car profitability, and the sense of being in a good place again. How can we carry that forward, and helping the manufacturers to realise that perhaps some of the short cycle business they do doesn't work for anybody, and actually it's getting good margins from new cars and used cars reduces their cost to retail and ours. And that getting good volume doesn't necessarily have to be done with a big target, and the brand's riding on it. We've seen some manufacturers pull away from that, and their volume hasn't really changed. So I think there's a lot of things that we can focus on, both internally but also working with our partners to try and improve the prospects for next year. So there's the sort of key things that we're going to be looking at.
Okay, thank you. And Stuart, where will TrustFord's focus be?
There'll be an ongoing push for our Now project, where we do TrustFord Now, delivering a car within an hour of sale, and also bring it to me. So again, a customer can have a car transferred from one dealership to the other, and we undertake to do that within 12 hours. So that's something that we're focused on, and also digital offering to try and again do more online. I think I carried out a little bit of survey over some of our customers during the lockdown, and the customers want to still have a showroom experience, and that was something that 85% of the customers that responded to the questionnaire said they were happy to buy the car online, they were happy to do the finance online, but they still wanted the experience of actually having the car unveiled in the showroom. So that's something that we're going to continue to push really hard, along with our after-sales businesses and our parts businesses, and we've got quite a lot of new expansion in terms of buildings, new developments that we're on with. So there's a pretty full diary, that's for sure. We just need to make sure that we get through this pandemic, and that hopefully after Christmas there's not another lockdown, which I think there's a sort of potentially real danger of. If everybody rushes out to the shops during December to get Christmas presents, then that could spell disaster for us in the early part of next year. So, fingers crossed that doesn't happen. But lots to go for, lots to do, lots of exciting things on the go for TrustFord.
Okay. Peter, 2021 for Swansway?
Well, I've got to say I'm in the Darren camp here. I think the crucial areas are the OEMs contracts could be realistic. Are they going to be a hard Brexit target? Are they going to be a soft Brexit target? And if we get a hard Brexit, there's no doubt we'll want to start off with the soft Brexit target. Will they change? Totally agree with Darren on the fact that pre-reg is the absolute curse of the motor car industry. It only benefits the OEMs. It doesn't benefit us. We will be obsessive over our digital, and like every year, I want to sell more cars. I want to make more money. And in truth, I would be happy with the profit next year that we've made this year.
Do you think that will happen?
I'm hoping so, yes.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
We'll see in next year's AM100, I guess. So we've had a number of questions from the audience. Perhaps I might ask these to perhaps just one or two of you at a time. What are your thoughts on the Prime Minister's announcement this morning about 2030 being the cut-off for petrol and diesel cars? Peter, let's give that one to you, shall we?
Yeah, can I be controversial again?
By all means.
I don't believe it will happen. I don't believe the supply chain is there. I believe we're going to have to build a heck of a lot of power stations in the next 9 years. And you've got to ask yourself the question, is electric the Betamax or the VHS of the car industry? Now, we all know which way it went and why it went that way. But there is also hydrogen. And I would also ask the government, how are you going to effectively collect your duty?
Right. Okay. Any other views quickly on that?
I think it's crazy. I mean, it's trying to win the environmental cap for the world, and it's likely to backfire, because the chances of having enough electric points throughout the UK to charge all these vehicles is just never going to happen. It's too soon. And the other thing that we've been lobbying hard, that Darren and I are part of a lobbying group with the NFDA, is on hybrids as well, is to get them to agree that hybrids should extend their life as well. But to be trying to eliminate petrol and diesel new sales in the best part of 9 years' time, I think is, like Peter says, I think it's a challenge that I think will be nigh on impossible to achieve.
Okay. There's a question here about after sales, perhaps for you, Darren, this one. In terms of investment, will you be investing in equipment such as lifts and service equipment, or are these being put on the back burner as less of a priority? Perhaps as given the one of the question marks around EV is what's going to happen in terms of service revenue. What's your kind of perspective for short and long term, really, on the after sales side?
A couple of years ago, when we decided we want to aim towards 100% absorption as a standard, to get that back in the business, it was also at the same time as doing it with the same amount of ramps. So we introduced hours per ramp sold rather than hours per tech sold. Because if you think about ramps, they're there for 24 hours a day. You're open for 8 and you're selling maybe 6 or 7 if you're lucky, which is ludicrous when you think about the cost of investment. So our route was about investing in capacity. So looking at shift working, weekend working, and in many places now we've got 24-hour working, and we've got those ramps running the whole time. So the way we've got to some businesses, some big businesses selling 4,000 or 5,000 hours a month now, is by doing it from the same ramp base. So I personally wouldn't want to invest any more in more equipment. I just want to get more technicians selling more hours over more hours. That worked. So that's what we've done, and that's what we'll continue to do. In the long term, there's going to be something to do to those electric cars. I'm just not 100% yet, but if you think about the amount of cars on the road, there's like 33 million cars. Most of those have got engines and drivetrains. By 2030, there's still going to be over 20 million of those cars on the road. And I think the last car ever that's going to have an engine to be scrapped is going to be sometime in 2040. So there's still plenty for us to go at. And as a franchise operator, that we're always being challenged by our manufacturer partners to do better a job on segment 2 and older cars. And look, they're right. We could do better, but we know it's going to reduce our gross profit. So, but if there isn't gross profit to be had on electric cars as much, then you're going to focus on those older cars. So I think we've got a long runway yet still with petrol cars. And like Peter, I'm not sure that the whole 2030 and Stuart target is going to be met. If there's anything like Brexit, there's your answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Your microphone's off.
I think Tim Rose has muted himself.
I was going to say the immortal words of lockdown.
I didn't.
Yeah.
But
you're on the standard word nowadays. Issue 3 times a day to somebody, isn't it?
I'll blame it on my Wi-Fi. Question for Stephen Matthew, perhaps, as the kind of suppliers and observers of the industry's perspective. So, question here: if more people continue to work from home, reducing the commuter's need for a car, will this have an impact on new and used car sales? Will 2 or 3 car families become 1 or 2 car families? And what's your kind of views on that? That's Steve first. Do you have a...
Yeah, I mean, that is a fair point. I think ultimately, though, where you get to is the UK fundamentally is still driven by cars. The infrastructure, the public transport is not great within the UK. So even though there will be a predominance of people potentially working from home, I think that what you'll have is more of a hybrid. So rather than working solidly from home 5 days a week, it could be 4 days, 3 days from the office and a couple of days from home. But I think there will still be that need for cars. People still want to own and drive a car. We're very much a car-led country, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with Steve. I think people's mobility patterns will change. It won't necessarily mean a total reduction in the number, because the flip side is people didn't want to use public transport because they didn't want to risk catching COVID. They went out and bought used vehicles so that they could get around without having to be dependent on other forms of traffic. So I think we'll see changes. I don't necessarily see a reduction in the total car park.
Okay, thank you. I'll just quickly get another couple of questions, but I'm conscious we're just about out of time. Do the panel think the business model will change of selling cars in more of a warehouse storage / click and collect kind of model rather than investing in showrooms in the future? Peter, we'll get you to answer that one.
Well, I believe there will still be a need for a showroom. In fact, we've just bought a Volkswagen retailer in Oldham, and we're going to relocate in the next 2 years and build a new site. There has definitely got to be a point where people can come and touch and feel and smell and get the experience. It's not like buying a T-shirt from Boohoo. This is an emotional purchase. And I believe there will be a need for showrooms, maybe smaller showrooms, but there will definitely be a need for showrooms and bigger used car pitches.
Stuart, your perspective, you've already talked about TrustFord now. So does click and collect and a warehouse style business suit your model going forward?
To an extent, but I agree with Peter. I think, as I said earlier on, the customer wants the experience, wants to see, touch, feel the car and have that experience at the point of delivery. But in terms of actually purchasing the car or financing the car, then there is a sort of bit of a swing towards a lot of that now being done online. And it's like the whole industry has changed. Years ago, you used to talk about tyre kickers wandering around umpteen showrooms before they made a decision. Today, they do all the research online, so it's very easy to make that decision and come to one dealership. But I still believe, as Peter says, that there's a strong need for showrooms. And I guess as an industry, one of the things that we need to try and just watch very carefully are the guys that are trying to break into the business, such as Kazoo and Heycar and guys like that. They're disruptors in our industry, and we need to try and protect ourselves from all of that disruption.
Thank you. So final one, and then we'll have to do the big reveal. Perhaps to Darren. So the question about we've talked about people. What's the nature of the online training that your staff have been able to do this year? The changes.
Well, I mean, full credit to our learning and development department. I mean, they have converted every single piece of training that we do to e-learning. So, there is no need anymore to travel to our head office. There's no need for, regional training. And I separate training and coaching. So coaching, there's still a need for one-to-one, socially distanced or over Zoom clearly at the moment. The kind of the standard kind of induction training doesn't happen anymore, and the kind of courses that we do will be done, by e-learning or over voice video call like Zoom or Teams or whatever. So that's had a huge benefit for us. It's more immediate, and you're reducing the time out of the business, traveling costs, hotels, etc. I think we had to do it in a far more personal way as well. So I think we've got something like 12 e-learning courses that people have managed to do rather than doing the training this year. So it's been a big challenge, but we've got our own e-learning manager who does all that for us. So we're quite fortunate. I think there's many other companies that do it for, on behalf of for the industry and for dealers. So it doesn't have to be just the kind of down to just large groups. I think smaller dealers can tap into that as well. Big saving.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Darren. Well, I'm afraid that's all we're going to have time for. So my thanks to Darren, Stuart, Peter, and Matthew, and BDO Steve Labar, of course. Now we will switch off our cameras and leave you with a full countdown. So here is the 2020 AM100.